The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for a Still in Motion Photography webinar. We have a house full today from people around the world, so thank you all for joining. I appreciate Cody Rich being here with us today, who is our extreme team photographer, pro photographer, who's going to be sharing a lot of insights with us. Before that, my name is Sai, and I'll be your host today. Some housekeeping items before we move ahead with the presentation. So on your screen to the left is the GoToWebinar viewer through which you can see the presentation. To the right is the control panel where you can select an audio mode and ask questions. As always, our presentation today will last for about 40 minutes, after which we'll be open for Q&A. As we go through the webinar, please leave us your questions in the questions box you see on your control panel, and we will answer as many questions as time permits after the presentation. Most importantly, the webinar will be recorded and sent to you via email in 48 hours. Last but not the least, I'd like to mention that Cody will be showing us a few videos in his presentation today, and you might experience a little bit of a lag or a jitter depending on your internet speeds and GoToWebinar server speeds. Unfortunately, this is beyond our control, and I request everyone to please bear with us if you see the video being a little jittery there. So with the housekeeping items aside, let's move on to the webinar. We're privileged to have Cody Rich as our presenter today. Cody is one of our most esteemed Extreme team members and a Nikon USA ambassador. Cody is a world traveler and a true storyteller, so I'm excited about that. We're really excited to have him share with us his assignments and shed light into motion and still photography techniques today. So with no further ado, I'll hand it to Cody, who will take us through the presentation.
Hey, thanks a bunch. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining. It really excites me, the idea that we in 2016 can have a quote-unquote conversation like we're about to have today, where we're talking to folks around the world. Folks have tuned in from India, which good job for staying up so late, and folks from North America, Europe, South America. It's a pretty remarkable time that we live in, and I think that really parallels the theme of my presentation today. I deeply believe that we are living in a time where the playing field has never been so level, and never have the tools been so accessible to tell stories and communicate in new ways, where there are no boundaries. It's no longer about, do you own the incredibly expensive camera equipment? It's now about, do you have the ideas and the passion to actually do it, to tell stories and capture the subject matters that mean the most to you? And that's a pretty remarkable time, and I think the way this presentation is being streamed online is a great example of that. We are just so empowered with technology. Now it's how we harness that technology and utilize it to tell our own stories is what really counts. My name is Corey Rich. I'm an adventure photographer and filmmaker. And what I thought I would do is walk through, we're going to focus on a few different subjects. We're going to talk about, of course, at the core, creativity. We're going to talk about pursuing passion, the technology behind shooting still and video, but also touch on the business of photography and filmmaking, because I think all of these themes are really intertwined, whether you do this as a hobby or whether you do this as a profession. There's always that balance between having enough raw talent, having enough passion, and being a good person. And those three ingredients tend to be the ingredients that make this possible, to make great images or make great videos and potentially even turn it into a career. This is my office. I spend a lot of time outdoors in adventure environments. This is when I'm the happiest, when I'm a participant in the activity, when sweat is dripping into my eyes and my heart's beating at 130 beats per second, and I'm really engaging with my subject. I learned really early on that I'm the most creative. I'm in what scientists and psychiatrists call the flow state. When I'm a participant and I have a camera to my eye and I'm engaged in the creative process, it seems I perform at the highest level when I'm there. I originally fell in love with rock climbing. I was 13 years old. I did 35 pull-ups, and one of my junior high school teachers invited me on my first ever rock climbing weekend. And a natural extension of that was to take my father's camera, borrow my father's DSLR camera, and try to make photographs of these weekend adventures so that I could really share stories back on the playground with my buddies. And I realized pretty quickly it wasn't just about owning a DSLR camera, a great camera. It was actually how you used that camera and how you processed the situation in front of the camera and determined what type of a story you were trying to create. So rock climbing is really in my roots, but I realized pretty quickly it wasn't just about the climbing culture. I spent a lot of time photographing rock climbing, and then I really realized it was what I enjoyed was being outside in wonderful locations with interesting people that are following their passions and pushing themselves mentally and physically. And so I really began diversifying the types of subject matter I was shooting. I tried to just find time, and I always say this in photography and in filmmaking, you know, you can't have your cake and eat it too, meaning there's always sacrifice in doing something that you love. I've never counted the days, but I've spent a lot of days outside in wild environments taking pictures of both friends and professional athletes, rock climbing and snowboarding and scuba diving. But that comes at an expense. That means I wasn't doing some of the other sort of more conventional things in life, meaning I missed a lot of weddings and I missed a lot of birthday parties and time with friends and family. But you make a decision in life. You say, what is most important to me? And for me, it's always been the time spent outside behind the camera, experiencing this part of life. Yeah, I've always thought that photography and filmmaking is kind of a golden ticket. It's the opportunity to enter parts of life and scenarios that otherwise would be virtually impossible. It's a backstage pass to life is what I like to consider photography. It's anything that you want to see, anything that you want to experience. That camera is the tool that actually allows you to do that. I like telling stories. I like being on trips where I'm a participant. And this is a surf trip to the north coast of California. And it's not always about getting out there and actually having the opportunity to surf. It's about being there, being present, and making pictures that help tell a story. And a story is a beginning, a middle, and an end, where you intrigue your audience and you tell them something, you enlighten your audience, you share an experience with them. For me, the wilderness or wild places has always been a key motivator, and I think part of it is I personally get so much joy out of being in these wild places. I want to share those experiences. I want to share these special places with everyone, because the truth is my real motivator is to get people outside. I want people to go out and enjoy these wild places, whether that's in your backyard, the city park, or whether it's the national park set aside by our government. It's been protected, because I've found that those experiences are critical to my development as a human, and it turns out there's a lot of research that says we as humans need to get outside and experience these situations. While in college, I worked for a newspaper. I kind of followed the track of becoming a photojournalist, really parallel passions. I loved being outside, loved making pictures of the adventure environment, but I also realized I needed to sharpen my skills as a storyteller. And at the time that I was trying to sharpen my skills or sharpen my teeth in the storytelling world, newspapers were still kind of the ultimate training ground. And so I landed at the Modesto Bee in California's Central Valley and shot lots of assignments, everything from 4th of July parades to portraits of the mayor to soccer games and football games, kind of you name it, anything that you see in the newspaper, I shot it. And the key to that experience at the newspaper was just volume. It was muscle memory, repetition, shooting lots of pictures all the time. And what I learned later was that what I learned at the newspaper translated to the subject matter that I cared most about, which was the outdoor adventure world. And this photograph, I think, is really symbolic of that. This was later, years later, after leaving the newspaper to pursue a career in adventure photography. I realized that my style, the way that I saw through the camera, the way I captured imagery, was really it was shaped by my experiences at the newspaper. Photojournalistic imagery, storytelling imagery. This was an assignment for the North Face, the clothing outdoor manufacturer of soft goods, clothing, as well as tents and sleeping bags. And this is the type of picture that it's about the story. It's what's happening in that moment. Photography, still photography, is about three things. It's light, composition, and the moment. It's where is the light source coming from? What does the quality of light look like? What is the composition? Where are you going to put your subject in that rectangle? That's what we do as photographers. We control a rectangle. We can fill that rectangle however we choose, and we can turn it vertically or we can turn it horizontally. And it's the moment, and that third ingredient, the moment, which is when you decide to press that shutter button. And there's always that decisive moment, as Cartier-Bresson used to say. It's the decisive moment, and that's what we're striving for in photographs. We want wonderful light, interesting composition, and the decisive moment. And when all of those things come together, we have the potential to create a great photograph. But it turns out all of those rules translate into the world of motion. So for 20 years, my career was focused exclusively on still photography, but I loved storytelling. It was how could I, in a single photograph or in a series of photographs, communicate a story. And I like to say that in my career, and I think this doesn't just apply to photographers, this applies to any walk of life, any career, there are stepping stone moments, turning point moments, where you can go left or right, and whichever direction you decide to go has a huge and great influence on what you do for the next decade or for the next 20 years or 50 years, for example. And I like to say that I'm not a big technology guy, so you might be wondering, oh, now, is this going to turn into an infomercial about a Nikon camera? And the answer is absolutely not. But this camera is kind of this center point of one of those turning point moments in my life. I had a very successful career as a still photographer, traveling around the globe. I think I was traveling somewhere on the order of 250 to 300 days a year at this time in my life. And I got on a flight from New York City to California, where I live, Lake Tahoe, California, and I bought a Time magazine just before I boarded the plane. And there was a one-page technology column, and this camera, the Nikon D90, was the subject of that technology column. And after I read all of kind of the world news and caught up on the other stories in Time magazine, I flipped back to this D90 article, and the headline is what caught my attention. The headline was, "Filmmaking will change forever." And I thought, of course in my head when I saw the picture of the D90, I thought, there's nothing that a columnist in Time magazine is going to tell me about a camera that I don't already know. And boy, was I wrong. I read the article. It was just one page. It was very vague. But the takeaway was this. This columnist understood that this was the first video-enabled DSLR camera on the planet. And why is that significant? It's significant because as a still photographer, it's a form factor that we're familiar with. When you hold a camera in your hand 300 days a year, you become intimately familiar with these buttons, how to use this camera, how to hold it still, how to move the camera, how to manipulate the camera. But more importantly, by enabling the Nikon D90 to capture video, it was also the first video-enabled DSLR camera that allowed a still photographer or a filmmaker to shoot through an SLR camera and use interchangeable lenses. And what that really means is shallow depth of field. We could create for the first time cinematic-looking footage, but using a camera that was a familiar form factor and at a very low price point that looked cinematic with shallow depth of field. And he sold me. On that flight, I finished the column, got off the airplane in Reno, Nevada, picked up my cell phone, and ordered a Nikon D90. A few days later, it arrived at my home. And I had no idea that this camera was going to have such an impact on my life. I was a week later flying or driving to Yosemite National Park to work with two of my best friends, Tommy Caldwell and Chris McNamara, on El Capitan in Yosemite National Park. And we were shooting a portion of a documentary film for Josh Lowell and Peter Mortimer, two owners of Big Up Productions. And this section of the film, I was going to be shooting stills, a few still photographs that they could use for marketing, but also video footage that could be cut into the film. And Josh at the production company had already sent some kind of a big Sony conventional video camera that was, you know, awaiting at my house with batteries that weighed about 10 pounds. And I did some tests that week with the Nikon D90, and immediately I realized, this is before leaving for Yosemite, that the footage looked incredible. It was totally unbelievable. It looked like I was shooting on a camera for a Hollywood production. The quality of the footage, the shallow depth of field, it looked cinematic. It was the reason, despite having dabbled with video in the past, buying little camcorder devices, I was always so disenchanted because it was like I was shooting at f/22 the whole time, which means everything in the foreground all the way to the background is razor sharp. And as a photographer, we want the control over our image. We want to be able to control that depth of field, or how much is in focus in your frame. And so before leaving for Yosemite, I called Josh at the production company and I said, Josh, how do you feel about me shooting this project, this segment, on the Nikon D90? And Josh, coming from a family of filmmakers, he kind of heckled at the idea because no one understood what DSLR video looked like, or the ability and the potential of these cameras. And he sort of said, you can test it, but let's just make sure you use the camera that's tried and true. Well, I broke all the rules because it was like getting bit by the photography bug again. I just could not help myself. I would look at the footage on the Sony video camera, and it was that f/16 issue, in focus from foreground to background. And then I would shoot on the Nikon D90 while hanging on the side of El Capitan with Tommy and Kevin, or Tommy and Chris, and it looked cinematic. And so I think I shot 90% of the footage utilizing the Nikon D90 and the other 10% using the Sony. And in retrospect, it was probably a bit of a gamble, but sure enough, it's the footage that was used in the film, and Josh at Big Up Productions was blown away. So there was a warning before we dove into this that when I play video during this presentation, it's going to be stuttery and it will jump around. This is a 2-minute video. This is my very first experiment shooting video on a DSLR camera. And I show this because it's very important to recognize that everyone starts someplace. I didn't know how to shoot video. I didn't have a tripod. I didn't have a ball head. I didn't own a neutral density filter so that I could actually control depth of field. I didn't understand the correlation between ISO and shutter speed and frame rates relative to how you do that in the video world. But it goes back to that idea that content is king. At the end of the day, it's how you use your brain. It's what story you're trying to tell. So here's a taste of that video. If it's painful to watch, you can later go and find this online. You just search El Capitan, Corey Rich, Tommy Caldwell. You will find this video. Some of the videos I'm going to show are also on my website, and that's coreyrich.com, COREYRICH.com. So here's a taste of my first experience shooting with a Nikon D90 and learning the ropes, as they say in the video world.
El Cap is the most sustained, steepest wall in the world of that size, and this project goes right up the middle of it. This thing is just so far above and beyond anything I've been able to do. I put so much work into it. It's a daunting task, but yet it's amazing. It's the next step. It's the progression forward in big wall free climbing.
Chili burritos, black.
Every year, even if I don't think I'm going to come back, I find myself here thinking about this project, and they're on the wall suffering once again. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I love it.
So I think I show that, and I apologize again if from a streaming perspective that was difficult to watch and it felt more like a slideshow. But that was a game-changing experience for me. Being on the side of El Capitan, holding a camera that I was familiar with its form factor, but having the ability to both shoot still and motion. Now that's a really important point. It's not that I was just shooting video. I was also, after shooting a stunning video clip, I could flip a switch and press the shutter button and shoot a still photograph of Tommy and Chris climbing on the dawn wall. That was a game-changing moment. After that shoot, I didn't recognize it then, but my career was about to change. And I did it, I think, unknowingly. I began reaching out to my clients each time we were heading out to do a shoot. I would find myself on the phone with a marketing director or an art director and pitching that art director on, I know you're hiring me to do a still photo shoot, but why don't we shoot video as well? Let's create a little video segment at the same time, and explaining that never before had this been possible. Never could you parallel still in motion so seamlessly and so efficiently. What you're looking at right now is a series of running images and running lifestyle images for a client by the name of Roadrunner Sports. They're a big catalog company. They distribute all of the major running shoes out there, as well as they have their own apparel line. And for years I shot the campaigns and catalogs for Roadrunner Sports. And this, after Yosemite, this was the next assignment that I had in line, and I, of course, pitched the marketing director on why don't we shoot video at the same time, we'll create a TV commercial. And they didn't really have a need for a TV commercial, but I think I was enough of a convincing salesperson. And this is important. I wasn't asking for more money. I just wanted the experience to go out and shoot more video. That's how you grow. It's muscle memory, it's repetition, it's doing it lots of times. There's the old 10,000 hour rule. Once you do something for 10,000 hours, you're an expert. And I only had a few hours of shooting video under my belt at this point, but the hunger to shoot more video was enormous. And so the way that I approached it is that, their top priority was photographs for their catalog. But after we would shoot a photograph, I would, in the exact same environment, switch into video mode. I would take my Nikon D90, flip the switch, go into video mode, and have the athletes repeat exactly what they did in the still photograph. Now, kind of sear these images into your head. And now I'm going to play a 30-second clip that this was just an experiment, never got used as a television commercial, but it was an exercise in shooting more video. Roadrunner Sports, all shot on the Nikon D90. Let me see if I can get this to play.
All you need is Thompson, pair of shoes, and open road.
And again, not unbelievable footage, but it was in sync with the footage that we captured for the still campaign. So I shot that Roadrunner 30-second spot. I started doing lots of, I don't want to call it volunteer work. It was just learning. It was just the joy of shooting video. With no real end game. I was just following my heart. I wanted to shoot content that really intrigued me and practice shooting video. Well, it turns out in life, at least my experience, is that when you follow your heart and you do the things that you love doing and you do them a lot, it leads to opportunity. And sure enough, after a half-dozen video projects using the Nikon D90 spread out over a 6-month window, the folks at Nikon took notice of what I was doing. They saw there was a guy in California that was using a Nikon D90 to shoot lots of video content. And I'm not sure at this point I'd actually been paid necessarily to shoot video using a Nikon D90. But that was never the objective. The objective was follow your heart, do what you love, and at some point things would align such that I could justify all of the energy that was going into this process. And this magical phone call happened. The caller ID on my iPhone, said Tokyo, Japan, and I picked up the phone really curious to having no idea who would be on the other line, and it was one of the most incredible phone calls of my life. It was Nikon Japan, and they described a new camera. At first I had to sign some non-disclosure agreements and email those back, and then they described a camera that would shoot full HD video, would have audio monitoring tools built into the camera, mic inputs, earphone output. It was a souped up, very souped up version of the Nikon D90. And the best part of the phone call is they said, Corey, we're going to give you a blank white canvas. You tell us what you want to shoot, and we will use that video to help launch this new camera, the Nikon D4, which was the flagship camera at the time. We created a film called Why, a short film, a 5 or 7 minute film that profiled 3 prolific athletes and what drives them to do what they do at the highest level. Dane Jackson, one of the world's best whitewater kayakers. Alex Honnold, one of the world's best rock climbers. He's made a name for himself climbing without a rope, free soloing. And Rebecca Rush, her nickname is the Queen of Pain, and she's an endurance athlete that pushes herself kind of beyond what people envision as possible by humans. And the film was an absolute blast to shoot. It won a ton of acclaim in film festivals, got millions of views online, and I think it was for 2 reasons. I think one, it was this very special time in the still photography video world where DSLR cameras were really changing the way that technology was being used to capture video content. And simultaneously, it was at a time where the internet, social media, was really critical in terms of it wasn't about paid advertising. It was about when people like things, and there weren't the controls that we see now on social media. You could actually, it would go viral. You could send content around quickly. And so that, for the first time, it validated this idea that it made sense actually to pursue this passion, to continue with video. I was now getting paid to shoot video, but I was applying all of the same rules that I had learned in the still photography world. Shortly after the D4, the D800 came out, and for still photographers around the globe, the D800 was a remarkable tool because it was a 36 megapixel camera, if I'm not mistaken, and it was even smaller, the form factor, than the D4. One of the folks that took notice of the D4 video, Why, was an ad agency out of New Mexico, and they called and they said, we loved what you did working on that Why film, and we would love for you to do exactly what you did, but we want you to shoot the television commercials for the state of New Mexico. I'm going to show you just 1 or 2 of the 30-second commercials. And what was remarkable is we were sort of discovering or creating a new production model, and I like to call it small footprint production. And what small footprint production means is it's a small team. It's the opposite of Hollywood-style production where you have union crews, standing around where, one guy does electrical and one guy operates the boom arm and one guy does audio and one guy. In small footprint production, the model that we have worked in, everybody wears multiple hats. Everybody is wearing several hats at once. You're sometimes operating a camera, you're sometimes acting as a producer, you're sometimes setting up the lights, you're sometimes rolling audio. And that means with a small team, the goal is you can also create high production value. So the goal is, how do you create that $1 million look on a shoestring budget, relatively speaking, with a small team? And most importantly, how do you have a ton of fun in that process? So here's one of the TV spots for the state of New Mexico, shot exclusively on Nikon D800s. And the rationale for shooting on these small cameras, DSLRs, is that it enabled us to move quickly and shoot a lot at a price point that was reasonable.
True or false? There are only 2 things you have to agree on. Which way to go, and where to stop. New Mexico.
So again, if you're having a hard time seeing the videos online, we're getting some feedback that it's the volume was off on one of the videos and that it's pretty jittery. You can certainly visit my website, coryrich.com, and I believe the New Mexico spots are online under our video section, or you can just Google to find some of these videos. But I showed this video, and I think it's worth watching if it was jittery, watching it again after this presentation. I hope what you take away, I hope what people see is this looks like a Hollywood-style commercial. It's the camera's floating, there's beautiful shots, we have authentic talent, it's cinematic, there's shallow depth of field, there's great creative. The ad agency did a wonderful job writing the voiceover. They hired the correct voiceover artist. The music is wonderful. This was shot on a camera that you could buy at Costco. And that's the turning point. That's the key ingredient here. No longer was this a several $100,000 camera. We weren't shooting film. This was shot on a camera that you could walk into your neighborhood Costco and buy the camera for $2,000 or $3,000. And that's what we were using to shoot a broadcast commercial for the state of New Mexico. And one of the best moments during this campaign, New Mexico is a very obviously a very sparsely populated state. And at one point we were staying this was a 4-day shoot, we were staying in a small town somewhere in the middle of New Mexico, and I happened to be sitting next to I believe she was the Secretary of Tourism. And in these small towns there's one restaurant, one gas station, one hotel. And so our crew, the ad agency, the Secretary of Tourism, the talent, everyone is sharing 2 or 3 tables, and I happen to be sitting next to the Secretary of Tourism. And I hear her take a phone call, and she's obviously very focused, and whoever is on the other line is asking actually about the shoot and how is the shoot going. And she says, oh no, it's going great, it's going great. It's, you know, we're creating amazing content. And what's so remarkable is we're actually using a camera that you can buy at Costco. And I paused for a second and I thought, uh-oh, I wonder who she's talking to. They switched subjects, talked about a few other things, and then she said, okay, thank you, Mr. Governor, I'll talk to you soon. And I realized in that moment when she said, the crew is using a camera that you can buy at Costco, but the quality is still high. What she was really saying to an elected official is, we're spending the taxpayers' money wisely. It's no longer about how much can we spend, it's about the ideas. And the tools are available today to execute very high-level creative, but on a small budget. So exciting time. So we shoot the New Mexico commercials. I'm going to fast forward through this next one. Actually, I'll let this play. This is the second spot.
And good and real. The question is, where do we go? Where will the people, the landscape, and culture touch our hearts? Where is the place that will speak to us in a voice that is familiar and kind? Where? New Mexico. True.
All right, I just got the note also to keep my mouse out of the middle of the video screen. My apologies, guys. So that was another of the spots that we did for New Mexico. And I like to say that every job leads to the next opportunity. And I think whether you do this professionally or whether you do this recreationally, it's each shoot that you do leads to the next opportunity. It doesn't have to be for pay. We shot the New Mexico spots, and a month later the phone rang again, and it was an ad agency out of Detroit, and they were representing a large fabric manufacturer. But this ad agency, I don't think they understood what the word small footprint production actually meant. They really were accustomed to doing lots of high-end automotive work, and so they knew that I had skills in the action adventure sports world, and they wanted to do a campaign in some of the most remote places on the world that showed this new cutting-edge fabric going to new heights. And so they, of course, wanted to know what it would take to get that large footprint production down to Patagonia, Argentina. We looked at everything. We looked at Patagonia, we looked at Pakistan, we looked at the Himalayas, we looked all over the world at what that best location would be for doing. And we realized that when you looked at the budget, when you looked at the logistics, when you looked at the timing, that using the conventional model of production just didn't make sense. When you're going to locations like this, we're on a ridgeline in Patagonia, small cameras are actually an advantage. Now, the ad agency had an expectation of both capturing still photography as well as video content. We were going to shoot a video as well as a series of corresponding still photographs that related directly to the content that we shot in the video. So we shot a rock climber, we shot a skiing scene, and we shot a glacier travel scene. But going to these locations is not easy. It's difficult to get yourself there, period. And when you bring equipment, when you're creating or shooting a production, it's infinitely more challenging. And the logistics, not only are they difficult, but it can also become very expensive very quickly. But we embraced the idea of actually using DSLR cameras, the D800. We explained to the client how we actually shot the New Mexico commercials and how we shot the Y film. And you have to remember, this was at a time where it was still very uncommon and not an acceptable means of creating video content to use a DSLR camera. But I show this photograph because I think it really sets the stage for small footprint production and why using a small camera made sense. So here we are, we're in Patagonia, we're standing on top of the spire. That's my colleague Dane Henry, who's operating the jib arm out on the spire. We have a 15-foot aluminum jib arm with a D800 on the end of it. This took hours to put this into position. First we had to climb the spire on the left, then we jumped across to the spire on the right. We hauled the jib arm up to the top of the spire. We set up the camera. We had a cable that malfunctioned. Usually that monitor that's on top of the camera should be right in front of Dane, but when it's 0 degrees outside and 40-mile-an-hour winds and we're rushing to capture the light before it goes to poor mid-light, you just have to improvise. And so we have a small HD monitor mounted in the hot shoe, and Dane's squinting to do the best he can to see what's actually in that frame. But this isn't possible when you're using large cameras unless the budget goes way up and the amount of time that you have goes way up and the number of people that you have with you increases. So here we are, this is the same crew. There's 6 or 7 of us, same guys that shot Y for Nikon, same guys that shot the New Mexico commercials. And here we are in Patagonia, Argentina, combining the things that we love. We're outside in a wild place. You know, we're in that quote-unquote flow state. We're using cutting-edge small tools, Nikon D800, to capture video. We're telling a story, and we're doing it as a small team of people that actually really enjoy working together and share that passion for communicating. And that's a really important point. I've always had this philosophy that when you're going to work, when you're adding someone to your team, when you're going to work as a team, the key is surrounding yourself by people that are better than you, that share the same passion for what you're trying to accomplish. Everyone is on the same mission. Everyone has the same agenda. But the people that are around you should be smarter than you, more talented than you, funnier than you, better looking than you, and the right attitude. And that has always been my goal when trying to build a team. Apparently there's a lot of issues right now with the videos, so we're actually going to skip that video. You can go to my website, coryrich.com, and there's a Polar Tech Alpha video that you can watch that will give you a good sense of what we shot while in Argentina, and you can see the correlation between the still photography, the images that I just shared in the video. So I'm going to fast forward, and this is probably the last topic that I'll touch on, or the last project before we go into the Q&A section of the presentation. When I showed that Nikon D90 slide, and there's probably someone online that can Google this right now, but I believe that was over 6 years ago that the D90 hit the market. And in those 6 years, I went from 100% a still photographer to 80% director, filmmaker to 20% still photographer. Now, still photography will always be part of my life, but now my passion is telling stories in the form of motion. Avatar, this next project, and I wanted to go through the lineage of oftentimes how projects are born and how the small decisions in our lives oftentimes have an enormous impact on the rest of our lives. This project, Avatar, was born out of this email. A colleague of mine, a friend and client of mine, Florian Klinger at Red Bull in Austria, forwarded me this email, and this photograph was attached. And I think to protect Florian, I'm trying to remember, I think he actually left a message on my phone, and the message was something to the effect of, Corey, I'm about to send you a photograph, let me know what you think. And he sent this photograph, and I immediately, within 2 seconds of looking at this photograph and studying it, I replied to Florian via email, and I said, I don't know where this is, I don't know what this is, but I want to go. Let's shoot something there.
Hey Corey, quickly jumping back, and I don't know if you saw my message, but we're seeing your mail window. I think you just have to minimize that.
Nope,
Go back.
This is actually the slide. This is actually the slide that was emailed.
Yeah, cool.
So
I was thinking it was your mail window.
Yeah,
Nice.
This is intentional. I promise everyone I'm not actually looking at my email right now. But this image got emailed to me. You're seeing that original email thread. And we made it happen. And there are those projects where I say to myself, I don't care what it takes. This is incredible. I've never seen anything like this place. It looked like a fantasy movie. And sure enough, 6 months later, we were standing in that same gorge in Lebanon. And I always weigh, it's not always about the money. I mean, this is my occupation. I have an office, I have a staff, we have overhead. But I make decisions in life that are not simply based on, is this a good business decision? It's also, will this satisfy that mental desire to create interesting, creative content? And this was one of those projects where before we got into the details, I said to myself, we're going to make this work no matter what, whether it financially makes sense, doesn't matter. This is about creating something that's special. This is Sean Haverstock. We're standing in Lebanon at this point at the Batara Gorge. And this is a 30-foot jib arm that we have, that we've mounted to the top of the canyon rim. And our goal was to really do something special. We wanted the camera to be floating. We wanted to really wow the audience with the footage that we captured in Lebanon. And again, later in a couple of minutes, I'm going to try to show just 20 seconds of the video. If it's not working, please visit CoreyRich.com, and you will see Avatara on my website as a video, and you'll get a feel for what we were doing with all of these tools. So here we are. It's a relatively lightweight jib arm. We, of course, purchased all of these weights when we landed in Lebanon. And we traveled to Lebanon, I think, with more baggage than we had ever traveled. We spent significantly more than had been budgeted for excess baggage because we wanted the camera to be moving. This was shot both on DSLR cameras as well as the Red Epic camera. And the reason that we included the Red Epic is we wanted to shoot in higher resolution at that time. We couldn't get that out of the Nikon camera, and we needed really fast frame rates. We wanted to shoot slow motion. We also brought a drone. We do a lot of work with aerials, and so this is the FreeFly heavy lifter. We wanted the FreeFly Alta, but it hadn't been released quite yet. That's David Lama in the background climbing in this photograph. And this is Dane Henry and I. These are Sean, Dane, and I, and Bly Gillies from my office. The four of us went to do this shoot. But this is fast and light. This is not how it works in Hollywood. We're sort of minimalists. It's what is the least amount of equipment that we can bring with us to create the highest level of production value. And so Dane is actually monitoring. He's looking through the camera and controlling which direction the camera is pointed. He's controlling the movie. And I'm looking at the screen, pulling focus and also directing the scene, giving Sean feedback on where we want the helicopter to go, and giving David Lama, the climber, feedback on what we need him to do, if he should rest, what we need out of him. So I'm going to try 30 seconds of sharing the video. It probably is going to be jittery, but I just want everyone to get a taste of what we shot, and then we'll continue the conversation around the Batara Gorge in Lebanon.
It's not very common that you get to such a stunning location and there's nobody been there who's ever climbed it. When I walked in for the very first time, I almost thought this can't be real. I was just really excited to come here and to try to put up a new route. I'm doing it first ascent.
So I think I'm just going to cut out of that video because we're getting the same feedback that it's hard from a streaming perspective to see it. Definitely visit my website, CoreyRich.com, CoreyRich.com, and you can have a look at that video in full length and in higher resolution than you're seeing it now on your screen. But the goal here was it's the accumulation of all of the knowledge. It's applying everything that we've learned over the years and bringing it back to the subject matter that we love most, that we find most interesting. We're living in this moment, we're living in this time where we have cameras, we have the tools, they're readily accessible to us. Heck, even our mobile devices, our smartphones, allow us to capture both video content and still photography in the same device. And I think it's important to recognize and celebrate that we live in this time, we live in this era where the only thing that gets in the way of us telling compelling stories is our willingness to put our time and energy into it. The devices are no longer the barrier. So I think at that, we have 15 minutes left, and I know there are some questions coming in. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I'm going to straight out at the gate say thank you very much for listening, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey. That's a lot of behind the scenes, education. So that's really inspiring. I've had a few comments and questions about, people getting inspired about your story. So that's really good. So I know we have about 15 minutes left for questions. So there's already about 20 questions in, and then the rest of you can put your questions in, and we'll take them as they come in. So I'll jump right into the first one. So let's talk about Nikon cameras here for a minute. Is the Nikon D5200, D5200 good for photography?
Got it. And let me make sure I understood which camera model are we talking about? The Nikon D5?
Yeah, D5200.
The D5200.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say right now that anything, and I'm obviously a Nikon ambassador, but I'm going to speak broadly for a second about cameras in general, DSLR cameras. Today, any DSLR camera that you're buying is quote-unquote good for taking still photographs. What you're buying right now for sub $1,000 or $1,500, these are incredible pieces of technology. The simple answer is yes, the D5200's a wonderful, wonderful camera. The D5200 in the hands of the right individual with a lot of passion and a lot of drive and raw talent and technical expertise can shoot Pulitzer Prize winning images with the D5200. And this applies not just to the Nikon D5200. There are a lot of price point DSLR cameras on the market today that it's unbelievable what you're getting in that D5200 package today. So I know that's a kind of a long-winded answer to say that cameras today, if they're making it to market, are really good.
Awesome. And then the next one is about accessories. So what would you consider the 3 most important add-on accessories for shooting video with a DSLR?
That's a really great question. So I think the 3 things that if you're contemplating or you've already taken the dive into shooting video with your DSLR camera, there are 3 things that you need. One is a tripod with a fluid head. Now, a conventional tripod for still photography oftentimes has a ball head, and the goal in still photography is you're 9 times out of 10 locking the camera in a position so that it's not moving. But in video, you're frequently moving the camera with your subject, and you want that movement to be fluid. And when you move right to left, that's called panning, and when you move up and down, that's called tilting the camera. And so the legs theoretically could be the same, the tripod legs, but you need a fluid head that allows you to fluidly move your camera right to left and up and down, and the ability to lock it. Now, I'm going to take that comment one step further. If it's worth spending a bit of money and getting a real tripod with a real fluid head that's designed for video, And when I say real, that means you want a leveling head on the tripod. So that means when you set up your tripod, you quickly put the legs down, and it might not be perfectly level, but underneath the head there's a ball that you loosen the ball and you level just the tripod head, and then you can fluidly make moves. Versus if you mount a fluid head on a conventional tripod, it takes you 3.5 minutes to finally level each leg of the tripod, and you don't have that time when you're shooting video and you're constantly moving your tripod. So you really want a tripod that has a leveling head, that's a nice fluid head so that you can move your camera fluidly. Number one. Number two is a neutral density filter. And you can buy, neutral density filters are basically tinted glass, like very high quality optical glass or plastic that have essentially a tint on them. And what that tint is doing is it's cutting the amount of light that comes into the camera or into the lens. Now you can buy ND filters in sort of two different formats. One, you can buy a set of ND filters. So you get a half stop, 1 stop, 1.5, a 2.5, a 3, a 4, a 5. And they're all screw-in filters for DSLR cameras, so 77 millimeter for most of the Nikon professional level lenses. And you have a wallet full of these ND filters. But that's expensive, just to be clear. Each of those filters, you know, it can be costly. Or if you're just getting into the video game, you can buy a variable ND filter, and that's much like a polarizing filter. Depending on how much you turn the filter, it increases or decreases the amount of neutral density, or cutting or allowing more light into the lens. Now, I guess it's worth a quick explanation of the reason that you use a neutral density filter is in video you have less control than you do in still photography over exposure. In video, and I'm not going to get into details, but you're sort of stuck at 50th of a second for shutter speed if you're shooting at 24 frames per second. And then your other control is aperture and your other control is ISO. So you have these three controls. But you want shallow depth of field, and the only way to maintain that shallow depth of field is if you can add neutral density when you're in bright situations. So number one, tripod with the fluid head. Number two, neutral density filter, whether it's a set of filters or a variable ND. And number three would be a microphone. And you know that we could do a whole episode on just microphones, but I'll keep it real simple right now. You can buy an external microphone that goes on the hot shoe of your DSLR camera and plugs into the microphone jack, and that increases the quality of sound. You could buy a lavalier microphone that's wireless that you mount on your subject. But the go-to for me, and I use it all the time, it's one of my favorite mics, is the Nikon ME1. It's the Nikon ME1. And what I love about that microphone, there's lots of microphones that are designed to fit on your camera, but what I love about the ME1 is it's bus powered, meaning once you plug it into that microphone jack, you don't need a battery in the microphone. And I found that's really valuable, because I find the more batteries I have in my system and switches that I need to remember to turn on and off, the more likely I'm going to make a mistake and forget to turn it on, and you think you're getting better audio and then you realize you weren't recording at all because the battery was dead. So microphone is number three. So tripod with a fluid head, ND filters, and a microphone, external microphone.
Perfect. So many questions coming in. So I'm going to try to combine a few on the workflow here. So let's see how this goes, Corey. So do you edit your own photos and videos? And if so, how long does it take? Could you also talk about audio workflow? So those two questions combined, yeah.
Sure. So I think on the editing front, the answer is yes. I still love looking at the content that we've captured in the field. Now, it's worth pointing out that there's different levels of work that I'm doing. I have a camera sitting in my living room all the time. Usually it's a Nikon D810, D750 actually, that's sitting upstairs. And there's always a lens on it. There's always a card in the camera. There's always a full battery with no lens cap on the camera. And I take pictures every day. Like in the morning, at midday, if something's interesting, on a weekend, the camera's always with me. And those pictures I always edit. We use Photo Mechanic is the software. It's a very efficient editing tool. And when I download a card, I rip through the images and I tag them. If they're good, they get a tag. If they're bad, they don't get a tag. We keep all of the content. It all gets backed up and stored in several locations. And if it's a select, it goes into our Lightroom archive. So we use Adobe Lightroom is actually our archiving tool that runs off of an imaging machine in our office. Now, when we get into professional, high-level, for-pay projects, it's a little more difficult to manage than the photos and the videos that I'm shooting in my house of my family and my dog and my friends. And then it gets taken much more seriously, and it requires a lot more time to go through tens of thousands of photographs after a shoot, or hours and hours and hours of video content. But we do all of the editing in our office. When it comes, video's a much more complex animal than still photography. Still photography is very straightforward. Our workflow is always, we start by selecting the best images in Photo Mechanic. If we're working for a client, we then do the retouching internally using both Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop. Though most of what you're seeing, most of what I shoot is pretty real. You're seeing not the raw file, but you're seeing a raw file that we've adjusted contrast and saturation and brightness. And occasionally when we're working in the advertising world, we'll do some compositing and either add something to the frame or remove something from the frame.
Okay.
Video requires much more time and energy. Video, it's not as easy as dumping the clips into Photo Mechanic and tagging whether you like it or not, because video typically ends up in an edit, and we spend enormous amounts of time editing video. We use both Final Cut Pro and we use Premiere, depending on the client and depending on the project. And occasionally we'll dabble with After Effects when we need to do more sophisticated editing. Again, it's kind of a big question. How do we edit and still photos and video? We could spend a whole episode just talking about editing and workflow. I guess the final portion to that question, and maybe I'm going to make a statement about backing up data. In the field, it's probably no surprise that I'm shooting on SanDisk memory, so both CF cards and SD cards. Extreme Pro. All the time we're looking for the fastest, most reliable, most durable products available. We also take our backup in the office very seriously. We usually back up in triplicate in the field and triplicate in the office. We have a server that we work off of locally in the server, and the server gets backed up, and then we keep raw data set backups off-site of all of the projects. So, data, now that we're no longer shooting film, obviously, it's all digital information, and we take backup very seriously, because it's, whether that's photographs of your kids or whether that's an assignment that someone hires you to do, you just cannot lose that data. And, I like to say storage today is affordable. I mean, it's never been so affordable. Let's see, there was a final part to that question, and I've forgotten.
That was about the audio workflow.
Yes, okay. Audio is a really good question. Audio workflow starts with, don't screw it up in the field. The audio, it seems easy, but it turns out it's one of the most challenging aspects of video production. Don't screw it up in the field. Do everything in your power to make smart decisions about recording sound while you're in the field. And there's some real basic rules. If you're using, that onboard microphone that I suggested buying, the ME1, when you're doing your interview or you're recording sound of your subject, walking in the dirt or the dog playing or the, whatever that sound is, for example, make sure that the wind is blowing over your microphone rather than into your microphone. If you hear a tractor in the background, do not in any way convince yourself that you're going to be able to remove the sound of the tractor later, because it just doesn't work that way. So it's the number one workflow management, quality control piece of advice I can give in the world of audio is be very, very, very critical and deliberate about how you record sound in the field. But we manage from a workflow perspective our sound the same way that we manage our still photography and our video. We back it up, we take that backup seriously. But when we're doing interviews, we sync the sound immediately when we get back to the office. And if at all possible, we pipe the audio into all of the cameras as a scratch track so that it's synced natively when we get back to the office.
Good tip. You don't want to learn that the hard way. Hey, so many questions, so little time. So, Cody, I want you to kind of let people know about your website and your Twitter handle once more, so they can ping you with any questions. We'll take one more to end with, but before that, if you can just let them know your Twitter handle and your website, so they can tag you with any questions.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, first of all. And I'm a huge part of who I am and what I believe in is both creating content but also sharing and educating. I love the experience of both learning from others and passing along information. So I love the spirit of what SanDisk is doing here. There's a lot of educational content on my website, CoreyRich.com, CoreyRich.com, and go to our blog. You can back read the blog. There's tons of hopefully both educational and entertaining content there. You can also follow me on social media. All of our links are on our website, but we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, and all of the handles should be Corey Rich, CoreyRich.
Cool. And I know there's a lot more questions we couldn't take. So, hey, thank you all. Ping Cody on Twitter or Facebook, and he will definitely get back to you. Let us know if there's any questions too on our social spaces. So, at SanDisk on Twitter. And thanks again. And until next time, we'll have more of these series coming up. So, thanks for tuning. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Cody.
Thanks a bunch. Thanks, everyone.